All right, have at it, Mary. So just unmute yourself and you're ready to go.
Okay. Can you all hear me now? Okay, I hope I'm unmuted. As Paula said, in 2016, we had a journey to Santiago, Chile, and it was a wonderful journey. We had a great time there, and Ray was our coordinator. And we spent a week in Chile, and I was had in the back of my mind, what am I going to do when this is over? Because, we always have an extension. Now, Ray had arranged for us, the group, if we wanted to go to a lodge up in the headwaters of the Amazon River. I thought that sounded very interesting, but I had a place on my bucket list that I had always wanted to go. And while I was in Santiago, that was the closest that I would ever be to this place, unless I actually went there. And that was Easter Island. So I decided that I was going to go to Easter Island and get that one off my bucket list. And I had a great time there. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I saw. I mean, you're all familiar with everybody thinks of big heads. When I say I went to Easter Island, people say, oh, the place with the big heads. Yes, it's the big heads. But there's more than that. I'm not going to be able to cover everything about the island, but I will show you a lot of photos from there and give you some background on it, because it really is a very interesting place. It's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it's approximately halfway between Chile and Tahiti. So if you get a map of the world, in fact, I tried to get a map, and I was going to show you the Pacific Ocean and then say, and there is Easter Island, but you really can't see the island on most of those maps because it's a very small place. But it's also a very interesting place, and so I hope you enjoy the photos that I have, and I'm going to try to get those up now. And just give me a second here to get those up. So here we go. This is what most people think of when they think of Easter Island, are these great big heads, and they are really quite fascinating. And it's wonderful to just walk around. I walked around the quarry among them, and it's just, you feel very small there. And you really think about what the first islanders went through to get there. Okay, this is the flag for Easter Island. It's called Rapa Nui. That's the Polynesian name for the island. It is a territory of Chile. Chile became into possession of it after a war between Peru, Bolivia, and Chile. And that's when Peru and Bolivia were formed. In Chile, they all got their boundaries more or less as they have them now. And Chile wound up with Easter Island. At the time, most people thought there wasn't much there. There wasn't much... excuse me, I get the phone turned off here, that there wasn't much there. So I think they would be surprised at what's happened and the value that Easter Island now has. So like I said, it's approximately halfway between Chile and Tahiti. It has now about 7,700 inhabitants. Only about 3,500 are really Rapa Nui descendants of those settlers. You can't move to the island or live there without permission unless you're an islander. If you live there, you can't own land. Only the descendants of the original inhabitants can own land there. Chile does provide some services to them, but as you'll see, if you'll look, I'm going to show you some photos of the villages. You'll see they could use a lot more help than they're getting from Chile. Now, here is the island. How do you get there? You've got two ways to get to this island because it's right out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You can either go by boat, But if you go a boat, including a big ship, some of the cruise ships say that they're going to make a stop at Easter Island. But if you take one of those cruises, don't count on being able to actually land on Easter Island. The seas around the island are very rough, so it's not unusual that when a ship comes by, they are not able to get the passengers off to get onto the island. The only sure way you can get there is by air, and that's from either Santiago or from Tahiti. There's one flight a day from Santiago. During the high seasons, there are 2 flights a day. There's 1 flight a week from Tahiti, 2 flights a week, or I think it's 2, maybe 3 from Tahiti during the high season. So you have to plan a trip there very carefully. There's only one town on the island, and it is right here. It's Hangarau. These red lines are the streets, and those are the only streets and roads on the island. So you have the little town. You see it's not very large. Actually, it's quite walkable because I stayed on one of the main streets in my hotel, and I walked to almost all the places that I wanted to go, except when I went out with my guide to some of the more remote areas. Here is the airport, and as you can see, it goes practically all the way across this little section of the island. So it was quite interesting coming into that airport. We flew over the island. The pilot then made a 360 and came back, and then we landed there. And if you're anywhere around here, you're going to be running into the airport because it does take up quite a bit of the area of the little town. Now, the oral history of Easter Island says the original name was, and please bear with me, I'm not great with these Polynesian names, Te Pito Te Hinoi, which means navel of the world, which seemed appropriate because the island is right in the middle of the ocean. That was the only thing that was around there. There is the navel. It's this big rock right there. They've placed it there to represent the navel. Everything that comes into the island must be brought in by ship. There's a supply ship that comes every 6 weeks. So anything that you need on the island, including if you need a car, they'll bring that in. So this ship leaves Valparaiso every 6 weeks and brings supplies. The supply ship was there when I was on the island, but because of the weather, they can't always bring in the cargo. They have to tender it in because this is the harbor. This is the only harbor on the island, and you see the size of the boats that are in that harbor. These are very small fishing boats. Here's another view of the harbor. Over here to the right, I did find a wonderful little ice cream shop and bakery, but they're mainly restaurants here, so it's nice to go and you can have lunch or dinner and be right by the ocean and right by the harbor. Not a very exciting harbor, but boats were very colorful, and it was a very pleasant place. There were a lot of people walking around just enjoying themselves there. I'll give you a little background of the history of the island, because how did anybody find this island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which is, halfway between Tahiti and South America? Well, they believe that the first settlers came from French Polynesia in about 600 to 900 AD. They probably came from what is now French Polynesia. At one time, they believe that the island had 10 to 12,000 inhabitants, which seems quite a large group for such a small island. But when the original settlers arrived, the island was quite lush. There were trees, there were plants, there was plenty of fresh water, rivers, and streams. All of that is gone. I'm sure you're aware that basically the island has been deforested, and we'll kind of talk about what happened and how that happened. Not quite sure, but there are some theories on that. Now the only fresh water on the island comes from wells or from the crater of a very large volcano, which we're going to look at later on the south end of the island. Now, the first Europeans that arrived were the Dutch, and they came in 1721. They arrived on Easter Sunday, which is how the island got its name. They anchored for 1 week offshore. They had skirmishes with the locals, and they found nothing of value on the island, so they left. They did have some records about the big statues, the big heads and everything that they saw, but it was just a curiosity, and so 1 week was enough for them. The next group that came, the Spanish arrived in 1770. They claimed the island for Spain. Now, they stayed a little longer. They were there for 6 days. They looked around, didn't think there was anything of value, and they left. And then in 1774, Captain Cook arrived. And of course, we're all familiar with Captain Cook because we have been so many places that have statues of Captain Cook and want to tell us all about what happened when Captain Cook arrived at their particular location. Cook found the island in very poor condition. And he reported at that time that many of those statues, which the Dutch had seen originally in 1721, had been toppled. Why they were toppled, no one is quite sure, but he did find the island in very poor condition. There had been infighting among the islanders after the Spanish left. So we don't know what happened with internally that caused all of this discord, but the island was going into a very bad condition during that time because of the infighting. Now, I zipped past a few photos I wanted you to see. Here is, there's the village. Here is the only little town, and this is from a lookout, which is up on one of the side of the volcanoes. So you can see it's quite a small village, and you can see here there are a lot of rocks off the shore. It's a volcanic island. I believe there are 6 volcanoes at least that form the island. So you see all of these volcanic rocks. There's just not a place really to build a harbor. And there's not a natural harbor except for that one little one that has been prepared. Now, the Spanish came back later, but unfortunately it was on, as we are familiar with history of South America know, the Spanish were working the mines and exploiting South America for all of the resources they could find. Well, they needed able-bodied workers in the guano mines in Peru. So they came to Easter Island and they took all the able-bodied people away, took them to Peru and put them to work in the mines as slaves. When they were finally freed, only 15 of them were repatriated and brought back to the island. But unfortunately, they brought smallpox back with them. So by 1877, the census of the island showed only 111 inhabitants. Okay. So even Chile thought it was worthless, but they agreed to take the island because they thought it might have some militarily strategic value because of its location. Although they weren't that excited about what they found there. So they decided that they would lease the land to William Balfour and Company, which set up the Easter Island Exploitation Company. And they brought sheep to the island and they ran sheep there for a number of years. All of the local inhabitants were herded into the one little town, and a fence was constructed around it so they could not leave that town. The company erected walls with stones, which you'll see here. There are stones everywhere because it is a volcanic island. They moved a lot of these stones to build walls to either, corral the sheep or to keep the people into the village. In 1953, the island was handed over to the Chilean Navy, and inhabitants were granted citizenship in 1966. In 1995, Rapa Nui National Park, which covers 40% of the island, was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, I want to give you some terms that I'll be using as we take a little tour around the island. We're going to be looking at all of these statues. So let's start at the bottom with the platform. The ahu. The ahu is a shrine or a platform, and you'll see here at the very bottom all of these rocks that are lined up in rows, and this is an incline which goes up to this platform. Then there are more rocks built up, and the platforms are different heights, depending upon when they were built or the size of the statues that are put on them. Moai are these statues. These are the moai, and the pukau is the hat or the top knot. Not quite sure whether this red hat is, I'm calling it a hat because it's simpler, whether it is supposed to represent some kind of hairstyle, a top knot, or whether it is a hat. But all of the moai had a hat placed on the top of their heads when they were placed on the ahu. So let's go to the quarry where all of these statues were carved. And here in the background, you can see back here on the side of this hill are some of the moai that have been carved, and they're just sitting and waiting. This is the quarry. Everything was carved out of this side of this volcano. There are probably 1,000 moai all over the island. It's hard to know for sure because many of them are buried and many of them have been broken. But here you can see some of them. These little dots here are the moai that have been carved, and they were on their way down the side of the mountain to the settlements where they were going to be erected on ahus, or they could have been brought this far just to get them out of the quarry so they could do some of the finishing work on them. As you walk through the quarry, you're surrounded by the moai. And these are not finished, but you can see there's been a great deal of detail already put into them. Right here in this area, we're going to see some that are still in the process of being carved. But it's interesting to walk through there because so many of them have fallen over, or they're just upright like this one. But because of erosion coming down the side of this volcano, you cannot see all of the statues. They're partially buried. But here in this one, you can see how sharp the detail is in this profile. But look at the eyes, and I'm going to be talking about the eyes quite a bit because there's some significance to that. You'll see it's more of a triangular shape that's been carved out of the rock. The eyes are not finished. When the moai were carved here in the quarry, the eyes were deliberately left in that shape. And here again, you can see it's more like triangular pieces, triangular wedges that were carved out for the eyes at this point. Here's one standing upright, and they're all covered with lichens, as you can see. Now, here you can really see the eye socket, and it's basically just a triangular piece of stone that's been carved out. Here's some more. I just thought this was a lot of fun to walk around and see all of these in their various states of being carved. Now, this one, look at his belly. As you know, the Polynesians are very fond of tattoos, and even today many of them have tattoos. The moai also had carving, so there's no one is sure exactly what these moai are supposed to be. Were they erected to honor certain leaders or certain chiefs? Were they done for specific individuals? That is one theory. And because of all of these carvings on the bodies, they think that this represents the tattoos that the person that that this moai is representing, that these would be the tattoos on that person. So they're making a statue specific for each person. Now here is the way they're carved. You see that in the side of the hill, they have started carving out the body. It's laying there on its back. Now here in front is a stone. This is another moai that's in progress of being carved. And you see this one has come quite a way. You can see there's not much work at the eyes, but you can see the nose, the mouth, the chin. This is from the distance. That's not as sharp as I would like it, but you can see this guy is about at least 30 feet long from here to here. And then here is another. This one is partially covered, but he's also in the process of being carved. And here is another. So as they found the stone and as the size that they needed, they started carving. But generally, they were carved on their backs. Then they were dug out of the side of the mountain, and somehow they got them upright so that they could move them to the settlement where they would be placed on Oahu. This is the face of the other one that was in progress. You can see there's just not that much detail on his face. Don't know whether that's the way it was when he was left or whether it was just erosion that's done that. And then here is another that's in progress. That's my guide that was sitting there. Now, this is, I just refer to him as the big guy. This guy has been studied so many times. In the 1930s, National Geographic went to Easter Island and did a number of excavations. They did a study of the island because it was still quite, and it's still today even quite exotic, but back then especially so. But this is one of the largest of the Moai, and he only made it just a little way down from the quarry. And you can see here his shoulders, you can see his face, you can see his ears, and you can see that his ears are quite long. Some of the Moai have shorter ears, some have long ears. Believed that the islanders at some point started elongating their ears. Captain Cook said that when he was there, they did see some of the people that had such elongated earlobes that they actually pulled them up over their heads. I don't know, but that's what Captain Cook says. Now, here is what he looks like when he's been excavated. This photo was taken during the Thor Heyerdahl excavations back in the 1950s. National Geographic dug this guy up too because they wanted to measure him and see exactly how big he was. He is approximately 30 feet tall. So here you can see the various levels they've used to get down to the very base, and you can see all of these archaeologists, all of these people who were working on the excavation standing next to him. So that gives you a good idea of how big this guy is. Now, the earliest Moai were much smaller, but as time went on, the Moai were larger and larger and larger. So one of the ways that you can kind of date the Moai and as to know how old it is by how tall it is. And you can see here his hands across his belly, which you'll see on all of them. You can't see on this one whether there are any of the tattoos or any other carvings on him. Now we go to the second quarry. The hats were dug from another quarry in a different place on the island. There are two different types of rocks that were used. It's all volcanic, but they're two different types. This is the quarry for the hats, and here you can see some that have been dug out and they were starting to be moved. Here are some that were on their way. The quarry is actually, here you can see some people, it's up that trail over this hill is the quarry where they were actually excavating the hats. Now here are some more, they're on their way to the settlements. Now this one you can see looks like someone has carved a hole in the middle of that one. When the exploitation company was there were shepherds that had to go out and mine the sheep. So they found these big hats, and this rock is very soft. They would dig out shelters from these hats that had been rolled down into this area. So many of these, the shape has been changed or they've been hollowed out so that the shepherds could get inside to protect themselves when the weather was bad. This is the only or the largest sandy beach on the island. I showed you a few slides of the waterfront. You saw those big black jagged rocks, volcanic rocks, which were near the little town. This is the place where they believe that the first Polynesian settlers landed. it would make a good place for them to come in. This beach is very small. It's lovely, but it's very small. There are a couple of other small beaches, but they're even smaller than this one. Now here is the ahu and the moai that I showed you earlier. When these were knocked over, for whatever reason, these fell in the sand because they were on that sandy beach. So you'll see that these features here are a little more distinct than on many of the others, because once these were toppled, it did not take long for them to be completely covered by sand. So they were protected more than many of the other moai and ahus on the island. Now here is the back. You'll see that the back is a stone wall, but it's straight. The size of the ahu depends, of course, on the size of the moai that go in it. But the front of the ahu is sloping, and it faces the village. Many people believe that the moai are actually facing the ocean, but they're not. They have their backs to the ocean, and they're facing the settlement. Either the settlement that they're protecting, or they're facing the settlement where the original people memorialized in these moai actually lived. Now, this is another of the moai at this site, but you can see that he's pretty rough. He didn't get the same treatment as the others, but you can see his hands coming around his belly. But look at his eyes. You can see that's much more distinct. Again, it's that triangular shape that has been hollowed out to make the eyes. Now, when the moai were moved to the ahu in the village, they actually did have eyes, as this one does. This is a reproduction, but he is in the little town. There's a park that goes along the waterfront, and there are all kinds of carvings. Many of the people that live on the island are still carving this rock, and they display their work in this park. But this one is set up so you can really see how they looked when the carving was sharp. You can see his hands coming around to the front. You can see the long fingers. There's the belt or the buckle or the knot on the belt. You see his navel. Look up at his ears, how sharp they are. And here are the eyes. These eyes were made of shell and then placed. The eyes on the moai were carved out once it was placed on the ahu in the village. Now let's take a look at his back, and then you can see the other carving. This one shows how the statues would have been engraved with carvings that would be significant for that individual, we assume. So here, this rainbow color is the belt that he would be wearing. And then these other carvings, it's assumed, represent the tattoos that he would have. And again, you can see the village there in the background. Now we're going to continue in this little area near the village. And here are some of the other moai. There's a huge settlement was a huge settlement just outside the little town. And there are a number of the really old moai that have been erected there. You can see this one, he's all by himself, and you can see how much he has eroded, how much wear and tear there has been on him. And you can see that his back is to the ocean. Here's another view of him. Now this one is not faced on the shore. Most of the villages were along the shore, so that's where they are. But this one is along one of the roads in the island. He's all by himself. It's a little hard to see him, but he's the winter solstice moai. Now, why they erected him in this particular place, we don't know. But he is facing west, so that on the winter solstice, he is facing due west. So maybe they had a function to serve as calendars for the people on the island also. Now we're just going to continue going around the island, and I'm going to show you a few more of the ahu and the moi. This one didn't have a particular name, but you can see how the moi has been knocked over. Again, no one knows what happened. No one knows why this happened. We just have an approximation of the date that it happened. So whatever upheaval there was on the island was occurring back in the late 1700s, apparently. But here you can see what's left of this moi. You can see what's left of his hat there. And these rocks, of course, represent the ahu that he was on. It's still partially there. Here's a little close-up. You can see, again, the face of this one. Now, here is another of the ahus back here in this distance. So you can see how this ahu is elevated above the surrounding area. And there is at least one moi that's been toppled, and this looks like the remains of another there. And I don't recall right now how many were on this particular ahu. They ranged in number, so that some would be all by themselves. It would be a single one. I don't know whether that was historically accurate or whether that was just what they excavated at the time. But here's another where you can see them toppled. You can see the remnants of the hat and the remains of the ahu. Now, in addition to all the moi, you have all these petroglyphs, and they're all over the island. A common motif is fish hooks, which is what you would expect from a Polynesian island and from an economy that was dependent upon fish. This appears to be maybe a boat. It's hard to tell for sure. Looks like it's been carved over and under many times. I just thought this little figure was quite fascinating, and I've tried to figure out what it is. Is this supposed to be a frog? Is it supposed to be a crab or something else? I have no idea. But you'll see the little fish hooks everywhere. This one, I'm just going to make a conjecture here. But you can see some of the carving that's been done on this one, but you see these circles. And I don't know how many of you have been to Hawaii and been to the Volcano National Park, but if you go down, there's one section there where you go out on all of these volcanic rocks, and there are these holes, circles that have been dug, and they're like this. And it had a specific function, at least in Hawaii. When a child was born, the placenta was taken to this. The umbilical cord and the placenta were taken and put in one of these holes as an offering, and it was supposed to lead to good luck or protection for the baby that was born. I don't know if that's the same on Easter Island. I mean, a lot of the culture, a lot of the traditions, carried over from one island to another. But it just struck me as being very similar to what I had seen before. But nobody seemed to know if it was the same reason that these holes were there. Now, this is the ahu and the moi that you're probably most familiar with. If you see one where they're all standing, this is the largest one on the island. There are 15 moi on this particular one. And this one is quite close to the quarry where the moi were actually carved. There are more moi scattered out all over the grounds here that have not been placed back on the ahu. But here is the front of the ahu. Here is the back. And these are about 20 to 30 feet tall. This one right here is about 30 feet. I was trying to get something so you could have a basis of comparisons how really big these are. It's not the sharpest focus, but you can see some people here in front and standing in front of the ahu, and then you can see the ahu and then the moi on them. This is quite impressive to walk along there and see how large these are. And you do wonder, how did they get these moi from the quarry to the ahu? And then how did they get them upright? There are a number of theories about how it was done. Originally, they thought that they cut many of the trees and used the timber to roll would lay the Moai down and roll them from the quarry to the Ahu to stand them up. But there are different theories. One of them, just before I left, I saw a program done by National Geographic, and there's an archaeologist that had a different theory. I would have liked to have found a clip of that program to show you, but I think it is available. You can probably find it on YouTube or on the Nat Geo channel. But his theory was that the natives were correct when they said that the Moai walked from the quarry to the Ahus in the settlements. Because you wonder how this statue could walk. So the first thought would be, oh, well, yes, they walked. So it was some mystical, some magical way that the Moai walked there. But the theory that this archaeologist had, he set out to prove it. So he and his students went to the island, and they made from concrete a Moai that would be about the size of some of the Moais on the island, and it weighed about the same amount. His theory is that because the Moai are slightly curved on the bottom, they're not flat, it's just a slight curve, that they could have walked. If the early inhabitants had made ropes from available material, they could have placed those ropes around. They had one on each side, so there would be one rope going this way, tailing this way, another rope going down this way. He then had his students, of course, the students did the hard work, and they made the Moai walk simply by pulling one side of the rope just a little, then they would pull the other side, and it kind of waddled along, but they were able to keep it upright. They experimented putting the rope at different places around the body of the Moai. Where it worked best, where they were able to get it to walk, and they took it actually several hundred yards, was by placing the rope here around the eyes. So his theory is this is why the eyes were not completed when the Moai were removed from the quarry. They left the eyes to be shaped, of course, to put in those shell eyes, but also to give them the positioning and the leverage that they needed to be able to make the Moai actually walk. So this is the Moai from that Ahu, the only one with a little red hat, but you can see him with his hands here and his belt. He's in fairly good condition, and you might notice his ears. The other thing, the ears on the Moai get longer. The more recent ones have the long ones. This is the Moai that kind of greets you when you enter into the settlement area. He's a traveling Moai. He spent some time in Japan. He was taken to Japan for an exhibition because they were trying to raise money to do some excavations and do some restoration work on the island. So this Moai was taken to Japan and shown around the island in order to raise money, and they did raise quite a bit of money that they were able to use to start the reconstruction in this particular settlement. Now, here are some more of the remnants of the Moai. As you can see, there are different sizes here. Look, here's one back here. You can see this face is much larger than these right here in the front. So this village was probably one that had been there for many years. And this appears to be maybe the body of one, because you can see the hands coming around there. Now, this is the photo and the view that you usually see when you see photos of Easter Island and they want to show the Moai. So this is the one because it's the biggest one and it is the most dramatic. And here it is. This is just a panorama I put together so that you could see how it is situated on the island. And if you'll notice here, this Ahu is quite large, only about probably half of it has been reconstructed, if you're assuming that all of this is still the original. But then there are also a number of moai out here that are lying face down or have been broken into pieces. So there's still work to be done. I don't know if there will be more excavations and more reconstruction done on this one, but this was a huge settlement. I don't know whether it had any other significance to the people on the island, why it was so large, or whether it was just more people that happened to reside in that particular area. This is just another example of the overturned moai. This one, it just all kind of lined up. You can you can see the moai and you can see their hats. And then the stones here represent what would be the foundations for a house or a building of some kind. And you'll see a number of those around the island. But here you can see what's left of this ahu. And the hats didn't go very far, so it was easy to see those. This is another on the south part of the island. There hadn't been any reconstruction here, but you can see it's roped off. You can't get too close to this one, but again, you can see all the toppled moai. And here's another one of the hats. Now, this is the supply ship that was there at the island when I was there. It had been over by the village and by the town, and had spent most of the time there. But the storm came through one night, and this ship had to move over to the other side of the island because the seas were so bad, which is one of the reasons if you go on a cruise ship, you may not be able to get off because of the rough water. Here's another face of a moai. It's just there. There's nothing left of his body that you can see. There may be underground. Here's another face. This one appears to have been broken off. This one you can see has a lot of erosion, a lot of scarring on it. Now this is a very unusual one. This is a moai. It doesn't look anything like the others, but this is a female moai. And not so long ago, this one was broken. Why it is different, we don't know, but it had two arms, should we call them, coming up this way and then one this way. Those arms were broken off. Don't know what happened, why it happened. It's just they went out one day and those arms were gone. But you can see the toppled moai here. There's one theory that this particular site, especially since it had this female moai and because of the shape being much different than the others, that there was a ceremonial function and that maybe this was used for funerals. We know they did cremations at the ahus because there are cremains around at the ahus. And if you kind of dig around, you may actually see some of them still. But they have excavated some so that they know that the ahus had more ceremonial functions, at least for cremations and burials. And they have also found bones that have been buried under the ahus. So were the ahus built over the bones, or were the walls maybe opened and the bones put inside? You don't know, but anyway, that's another function that the ahus served. Now we're going to go to the volcano down on the south end of the island. This is the caldera. And remember that the Dutch and the Spanish and English and everyone said that there was no value to the island, and they all left. Well, there's value everywhere if you look. And in fact, during some of the explorations and the studies of the island, there was, and I'm not a biologist, so I can't give you all the details, but from the mud down in this caldera, we have found some bacteria from which they have been able to develop rapamycin, which is a drug that we now use to treat cancer. It's also been tested in mice because it apparently elongates their lives when they are treated with this particular drug. So, your treasures are where you find them. And sometimes you just need to keep looking. I don't know how deep this is. The highest point on the island is about 3,500 feet. So this would be the highest point down here. So this is several hundred feet to get down to the bottom of this caldera. And at one time they had to go down here after the springs and the streams dried up. This was the only source of fresh water on the island. Now we're back in the town, and we're going to look at some more of the Moai there. My first night there, I got in kind of late, and by the time I got to the hotel, it was too late for us to get out and really go anywhere. So I just went out exploring on my own, and my guide had said, be sure to go see the Moai where the tourists go at sunset. So I was like, okay, you want to fill me in on more of that? And it was like, well, I'd know it when I saw it. So here we have these Moai. They're, like I said, they're all along the shore here in the little town. Here's the one by himself. There are 4 back over here. Well, here are the 4. This one, there's not much left of him. But here's the base for a 5th one. I don't know whether they have him and haven't put him there, or whether they're still working on restoring him, because you can see where the heads have had to be put back on these. And in fact, part of this had to be filled in. So you can see how they've reconstructed them. Now here is one where they have actually put the eyes back into place. Okay, so this is what he would look like with his eyes. There you can see him from the side, and you can see he's one of the smaller Moai. Here are the remains for a house or a boathouse. And this is where the tourists go to see the Moai at sunset. This is where everyone is gathering. As I went around there, I was walking along looking at the Moai, and all of a sudden, all of these people are coming. And I found out you have to get there early if you want to get a place to sit on the wall. Otherwise, you're sitting on the ground. This is at the very beginning, so there weren't many people coming. But I do believe every tourist on the island came there every night to see the sunset, and it really isn't. It can be a nice sunset. So this is the early group, and I'm in the early group getting around here. So there were several hundred people. There could have been 800 or 900 people there every night to see the sunset. And this is the remains of an old settlement. So there are a lot of rock walls and either just big pieces of rock so you can find a place to sit. Now, I went every night to see the Moai at sunset. The night that the storm came in, there was just nothing. All I could see out there were clouds and rain. But as I started walking back to my hotel, I did see this, and it's like, oh, there's color. This may be the only time I get to see, take a picture of the sunset. It's not the photo I want, but I'm going for it. So that is not a Moai. That's just another tourist who's happened to be standing there when I took that photo of the sunset. But I persevered, and I came back, and my last night on the island, I finally got it. So this, of course, is one of the iconic photos of Easter Island. And these are the Moai where the tourists go at sunset. So we were all very happy that night to see the beautiful, colorful sunset. And now, if you really want to know how big these things are and how this ties into the rest of the world, I give you this. And Edward, I will now turn it back over to you.
I love it. That's great. That is great. All right, so just go up to the top. There should be a little red button that says stop share.
I'm not seeing a red button.
Okay, so close that.
Stop share. There it is.
There you go.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions?
Really interesting. Thank you, Mary.
There's much more to the island. I didn't get into everything that I saw or everything that I did or all the history. But I can give you some recommendation for books if you want to read about it. And I do recommend the National Geographic specials. They've had several on Easter Island, and I found them, I was just fascinated when I was watching them. And then after going there and see it, I especially was.
So Mary, got a question for you. So I had never seen the carvings on it. So did they have some history about, or did they have some information about that? Like some of the very first Moai didn't have the decorations and the later ones did, or something like
No,
that?
the difference is the size. The more recent ones are bigger. As the longer they were on the island, the bigger the Moai. The other thing is the ears. You have long ears and short ears. At some point, they started elongating their earlobes, and so you can see different size ears on the Moai. The older Moai have smaller ears. The more recent Moai have the long ears. And as for the carvings, the photos didn't. I couldn't get the carving on all of them. I had that one with the ship on him. If you're there, you can see it. You have to look really closely to be able to see the carvings on them.
I've got a question for you.
Yes.
The people that did the carvings, do we know anything about them? Anything about them and their tools that they used?
Apparently, they made their tools out of the rocks that they found on the island. So they use. There were several different kinds of rocks there, and they were using apparently some of the harder rocks to do the carving. Now, they also, I found this interesting, had a written language. They only the chiefs and the priests, they were able to write, but they did have a written language, and they would put it on wooden tablets, which is another reason that, of course, we don't have a lot of record of what they did, because wood just wasn't preserved. Also, those tablets were taken from the island. There's supposed to be one still on the island. I was hoping to go to the museum to see it, but unfortunately I missed that. But they're in several different museums over the world. No one has been able to decipher their writing, so we really don't know what they're trying to tell us.
Do we know the era? Is it before the Common Era?
Oh, yes. They, I had that at the beginning. We think that they got there from French Polynesia in,
AD.
see what is it, 600, 900 AD? Yeah, 900.
900 AD?
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Wait, 600 to 900.
Okay.
That's the best guess.
All right.
So Mary, this is Luann. I had to step away for just a little bit. I had a phone call. But anyway, when I look at the statues, it reminds me a bit of a cemetery, with family groupings together and the headstones. So are there any theories about that?
Well, okay, maybe that's while you were away. Yes, they do know that there was some kind of function, maybe a funeral function. They did cremations at the Ahu's because they found cremains there. They also found bones and charred bones inside the Ahu's. So, there was that function also, but who knows what else they represented.
Well, Ray had led a whole gang of us down to Chile, and our last night before we left, Mary went to Easter Island. Some people went to the Amazon and other people went home. And the last night the Chileans threw a party for us. The first part of the party, they had people dancing the folk dances of Chile. But then the second part, the dancers all went away and they came back out and they did the dances of Easter Island.
Yes.
What they think may have been, they weren't authentic.
Yeah, so I thought everybody was going to ditch Ray in Peru and come with me to Easter Island.
Yes.
At least all the women.
They
Yeah.
were unbelievable. And of course, they did
They were.
this crazy thing they do in places like that, where they got a bunch of us up there. They got Edward up there and, some girl, like did a hula looking thing. But the men, their dance was unbelievable. And they were
Yes.
all in like a squat position and all they had on was a loincloth. So we kept saying, now, Mary, we'd like a souvenir. And what we'd like is for you to bring back one of those guys for us.
I
they
brought
have-
you photos. Okay.
Do they have earthquakes on Easter Island?
I'm assuming that they do because it is in the Pacific in the Ring of Fire.
Well,
Yeah.
then,
Well, it's in the middle of the ocean, but they
Would
do
that
have
not-
volcanoes, so that would mean they probably have earthquakes there too.
would that not be something that obviously could have toppled these earthquake? Toppled these.
They don't think so
Oh.
because of the way that they were toppled. And also there were many people who were killed. So it was some kind of upheaval among the people on the island.
Oh.
Not sure exactly what was going on, but the population was down and everything. It was, yeah, it was a very bad time for them.
Well, did you see any dancers like those when you were on the islands?
Well, I started to go. They did have a show where they would do the dances, and I started to go to it, but it was the night of the storm, and I had already seen it in Santiago. And although the theater where they were doing the performance was close to my hotel, I did not want to be out on that storm. It was quite fierce. There was very heavy rain and very heavy winds. And I said, I don't think I want to be out. And there are no street lights. I would be out walking in that. I don't think the wind would blow me over. Even me, it would blow me over, and I'd be soaking wet. So I decided not to go.
Mary, how did you arrange your trip? Did you go on a tour or did you
No, I went. Well, it's interesting because I thought, well, I knew that you had to go from Santiago, so and I knew I would have to take a airline over there. So I said, well, I'll go online and get a ticket, and get all my stuff. I could not find a way to get a ticket. Well, I don't speak Spanish well enough to be able to read everything that the airlines have. So I finally gave up and I called someone that I know who's a travel agent. And I said, Irene, I want to go. Please help me get there. And she said she would help me. She had only arranged for one other person to go there. So it's not like it's a really hot tourist spot. Most of the people that I saw there were very young. They were students or maybe early 20s, and they were backpacking. You can walk all over the island. It's so small. And you can rent a car, you can rent a horse, you can rent a bicycle, you can rent a motorcycle, or you just take off walking. But I called her because I wanted a guide. I did not want to have to rent a car. I don't like to drive when I'm in another country. And so she found a company that actually did tours, and they arranged one. It was just me. It was a private tour just for me. And she got me the guide. And he was very knowledgeable.
So you talked about that there was a place that had shows. So has the culture, like in a lot of the islands in the Pacific and stuff like that, is there a resurgence now recently, in the last 10 years, 15 years, of the Rapa Nui culture?
They
do
are
they have
very,
like their own? Do they have their own cultural center and education
Yes.
and stuff?
Yes, they're very proud of their culture. The problem is there are very few of the original Polynesians left. And many of them are now, there have been intermarriage with the Spanish or with the Chileans. So there are not many that would be pure Polynesian. But one of the things that I did notice, I mentioned that the holes in the rocks was that, like in Hawaii, to offer the placenta and umbilical cord, to protect a baby. The church was just down the street from my hotel. And when I went to the street, I looked left and there was the church at the end of the street. I looked right and there was the ocean. And when I looked at the church the first time, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm in New Zealand. It looked so much like the Maori buildings that we saw in New Zealand, especially those ceremonial buildings, the ones that we could not go into because we were not Maori. It looked so much like that, and many of the carvings looked like that too. It was definitely, I could see that same Polynesian influence at every place that I've been that has the Polynesian culture. I could see elements of it there.
Do they?
Approximately how many?
Do the natives there speak Polynesian or Spanish?
They speak both. They do have their own language, but most of them speak Spanish too. And of course, there's so many tourists, they speak English, or many of them speak English. Not everyone does. I went to some stop. I knew enough Spanish that I was able to go to a shop and get some things that I needed. But for the most part, it would either be Spanish or Polynesian. But then, like I said, many of them are Spanish Polynesian or Polynesian Spanish. So they have the heritage of both.
Mary, approximately how many people live on the island?
Right now,
talking about-
maybe 7,500.
Okay. So they all live in that one little area.
Yes. There are a few houses scattered around the island, but if you want running water or electricity, you have to be in the town. Once you get out of the town, you you don't have any utilities or services.
Right. And are they like medium size, just regular houses, just like anywhere else, right?
Well, most of them that I saw were small, but they were nothing elaborate. Again, they have to use the building material that they have, and whatever else, whatever they use has to come in from Chile, from Valparaiso.
And were there children there?
Oh,
Did you see
yes,
many?
they have schools. The Chilean government runs schools for the children. They have a police force. They have a fire department. In fact, the fire station was right across the street from my hotel. So I said, okay, I'm okay if it catches fire. And they operate schools and hospitals and
There you
clinics.
go, Jackie, your next job. So how do the people make a living there?
Tourism.
And I bet was tourism probably recently. There hasn't been any for a couple of years. I mean, did they have COVID there?
I don't know. I assume that they do. It's all over South America. And since there's all those flights back and forth between, I mean, at least one flight a day from Santiago, I'm sure COVID reached them too. I have not heard what it's done to the island.
No COVID in New Zealand.
I have a friend in Durango, Colorado, who's gone there many winters to work with English and the hotel staff. And I was talking about going with her at one point, and then, you know, the pandemic hit and everything. So I don't know if she's going to ever go get that back going again, but she used to go down to in the Atacama to some of those tourist places and work with English. And she definitely spent a month or so at a time on Easter Island, and her pictures are good like yours. And
with her,
she said a
because
lot of
there's so much more. I didn't get into everything that I saw or did. And there are caves because some of the people moved into caves and they actually had gardens inside the caves. My rock climbing days are over, so I didn't go into the caves. They're difficult to get into, so I left that to all the backpackers to go see the caves.
this friend Joan is a big biker, and she biked all over the place. So
then yes, you can. They're bicycles. You can rent a bicycle, rent a motorcycle, scooter, whatever you want.
Most of the
Oh, you can even
backpackers,
get a
where are they
horse. You can
from?
rent a horse and ride it around the island. Horses
Where
are
most
everywhere.
of the backpackers from?
Hmm?
Most of the tourists, where are they from?
There were a large group of tourists from Japan that were staying in the hotel where I was, but people come in from all over the world there. The flights are either from Santiago or Tahiti. So there, and my guide told me there were a lot of people from Asia that came.
How far is Chile? You said it's halfway between, but how many miles?
It's about 2,300 miles from Chile to the island.
Whoa.
And it's
So
about,
it's about a
24,
6-hour
2,500 to Tahiti.
So how long is the flight? About 4 hours?
I don't recall what time I left. I think we left about 9:30 or 10 and got there in the middle of the afternoon. It took me forever to get my luggage at the airport. It's, as you can imagine, it's a very small airport. And in many tropical countries, you know, it's all open. It was interesting to see all the baggage that was coming off, because mine was the last bag off, of course. But there were people bringing in bags of food. There were these huge crates of lemons. I never saw so many lemons in my life. Lemons and oranges. So I'm sure that was probably for the hotels bringing that in, because all the food has to come in. And when you only have the supply ship come in once every 6 weeks, you've got to get your fresh fruits and vegetables by plane.
the red dot right here is Easter
Mhm.
Island.
That's it.
And Santiago's like kind of in the middle down here.
Hmm.
And Tahiti is probably what, right in here someplace.
Yeah, a little more to the right. The closest inhabited island to Easter Island is Pitcairn Island.
And you gotta like, finally it's going, there's Rapa Nui.
Yeah, there's Papeete. So there's Tahiti back over. Yeah, there.
Mm.
Little tiny islands.
Mm.
Yes.
How many days were you there?
Gosh, I don't remember. Because it was a day to get there and a day to come back. I had 3 or 4 days on the island.
Okay.
But it's so small, you don't need a lot of time unless you're going to be doing hiking and unless you want to kind of go into the caves and explore all of that.
What was your hotel like?
It was clean and it was comfortable. It was kind of basic. There weren't many lights, so it was not a place to, if you wanted to read going to sleep, it was not the best. But it was very clean, comfortable, and it was around, it was all these separate rooms around this beautiful garden and swimming pool. And I had a little terrace where I could go out and sit in this garden, and it was just lovely.
What year did you go?
16. If any of you want to go, I'll give you the information for the person who helped me set it up.
The amazing thing is that we have Polynesians with boats, which are really just large canoes, were able to travel that distance and not get lost. We're able to travel 2,000 miles in a full canoe and find the island. That is really
Yes.
amazing navigation. That they
Well, you
were
know,
able to do that.
yeah. That's why Thor Heyerdahl said they had to have come from South America. He saw a lot of resemblance with the stonework, with the stonework of the Incas. And I did notice that, especially in one place. I have a photo of the Ahu, and I'm looking at the placement of the stones, and it reminded me of the stones that I saw in Peru. But there's a difference. I understand that the stones on Easter Island in Peru were huge stones. They left the whole stone and put it there. And in Easter Island, it wasn't quite a veneer, but it was they shaped the rocks a little bit differently, but I still saw a lot of the same shapes, but it was not the huge stones that you have in Peru.
And the language is related to Polynesian and Hawaiian. It's got no relationship to the language in South American Indians.
No. Well, Thor Heyerdahl's theories have now they're discarded. No one, interesting in the 50s, but not so much now.
I think all the DNA evidence shows that the Polynesians came from Eastern Asia, Korea or China.
Well, they're saying that these came from French Polynesia, so they had already gone off the mainland of Asia and Taiwan before they got to Easter Island. Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording, but we can continue talking. So I'm going to stop it right now.